Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Hey.
We're very happy to have everyone join us today for a very special discussion on artificial intelligence, but moreover, at the cross-section of climate change, climate responsibility, and naturally so, ethics. We hope that all of you here at GatherVerse.live and our other social platforms and YouTube and Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth, and all our different streaming networks are edified so far from what you've heard today. We only have a little bit of time to be able to dive into a very cataclysmic pairing of these applied sciences and emerging technologies at this intersection of climate responsibility. With that said, I want to introduce you to everyone that we have with us, and we'll go round robin so everyone can introduce themselves, and then we'll chop wood. We'll begin with Katerina.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you, Christopher. My name is Katerina Gallic, and I'm the CEO and the founder of the Exergy SUSTech Powerhouse. And what we do, we help sustainable technology startups and SMEs across the global south build our ventures and make sure that they have a potential to create long-term impacts and also become a successful companies.
Thank you, Katerina. Arik.
Hey everyone. Hey Christopher. I'm working as an innovation and a strategy advisor. My main focus is on rejuvenation, and as such, the byproducts of how do we start to rethink in rejuvenation rather than in the traditional boxes that we have been thinking so far. Working with small and large organizations, and I think with my age, I realized that you need to change one mindset at a time rather than trying to change the entire world altogether.
Thank you, Arik. Paige.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and all of GatherVerse community. I'm Paige Dansinger, the founding director of Better World Museum, Horizon Art Museum, and Women in Horizon. I'm a metaverse world builder and work for a Web3 educational platform. I build gardens with communities. We build worlds together that envision how cities today and in the future, in community neighborhoods and in space, can be edible corridors and spaces that are created of, by, for all.
Thank you, Paige. Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon McPherson. Thanks once again, Christopher, for having me. I am co-founder and former CEO of what has become one of Africa's largest women's infrastructure investment groups. It's called the Wendy Consortium. And I am launching a new tech startup that's all about resilience. I teach project finance at the University of Cape Town. And when I came back to the United States, I really began to do policy work around climate, infrastructure, and security. And that's really what gave me the idea of using AI to really drive and really make resilience a real thing in marginalized communities globally by shifting capital. So we're de-risking investment in marginalized communities by helping companies to risk engineer and to adapt marginalized communities in ways that create long-term value for their businesses. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Philippe.
Hi, Chris, and everybody. This is a true honor to be here with you, and hi to the whole GatherVerse attendees. We're really excited. I know it was a last-minute addition, but I really appreciate the flexibility. We are Corazon Latino is the organization that I founded. I'm executive director. I have the honor to lead. It's a grassroots nonprofit in the U.S. We focus on climate, environmental justice within Latino, African American, indigenous, what it's called BIPOC communities. So we work very close with Forest Service, with the National Park Service, to agencies that manage both our public lands, but also in charge of a lot of the climate mitigations. strategies. We also have international work. We are recognized by the UN as an official, I forgot the exact name that we have, but we are recognized by UN to participate in panels and in decision-making bodies from the nonprofit sector. And one of the things that we've used since the inception of Corazon Latino is technology as a pillar to the work that we do. So whether it's citizen science, whether it's content production, where we were actually the first organization in the US, Latino organization in the US to launch an NFT project focused on environmental protection. So we try to stay, and we've been also very vocal in terms of the current policy and legislation that is being shaped. Very recent, the White House executive order on artificial intelligence, because all of the elements that were mentioned actually in one of the keynote opening messages, it's about inclusivity. It's about making sure that every voice is part, because we're all going to be receiving the positive and the negative effects of AI, especially in climate. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you, and it's an honor to be here with all of you.
Thank you very much, Felipe. Thank you very much, Roundtable. Shall we begin? So let's get the landscape. Let's get it out here. This is GatherVerse Climate Summit. Some damage that's happened to this planet is irreversible, according to many scientists, and some that may differ with one another. But let's also look at the landscape of the prevailing technologies in which we're discussing at this particular gather. Artificial intelligence, generative pre-trained transformers, large language foundational models, huge models, consuming a lot of data. Servers have never been this hot as they've been today, contemporary to our time. And the reality is that we have now had time and opportunity, which has been less than a year before GPT-5, 3.5, and 4 has even hit the market. Now we have all other different types of generative pre-trained transformers that are arriving, these models. And the assumption is that most of us have had time to now interact with artificial intelligence in our respective focus field of work. Philippe, we're going to pick it right back up to you because you touched on this intersection of what you're doing with technology. But briefly, can you express to us, when it comes to our first question, how are we able to use artificial intelligence, this thing that we're still wrapping our minds around, this applied science that's evolving and growing, and up to recently has become multimodal in terms of access, what people have in the palm of their hands, power that they never had before. When we look at this technology that can be able to produce staggering amounts of information, but with acknowledgement of misinformation and disinformation as well, when it comes to this sometimes often contested subject of climate, if you will, but we'll let the Earth environment and the manifestation therein speak for itself. I think a lot of debates are off the table. Some still yet abide. Fair. But how are we able to take this approach pragmatically, sensibly, ethically, when we take this approach to artificial intelligence?
Well, you mentioned a lot of the opportunities and the challenges. We do see that artificial intelligence opens so many worlds, and there's people that are way more versed in this that can speak about it, the data, about how we address climate issues, how about science. The potential is there, but there's also a big potential for, let's talk it. Not to be doom and gloom, but it's of the proper, it puts our own civilization in jeopardy. So the same way that the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, was developed and it was used and has that destroyed, again, not into the ethics of that, but this is a technology that can, if not managed correctly and ethically, we can lead to the not of nature, not of the planet, because the planet and nature will prevail after us. It's about us. It's about humans. So for me, right now, it's making sure that we are promoting through, and let's be honest, we need government, we need action from policymaking to create the guardrails, to make sure that innovation is not hindered by excessive regulation, but at the same time that we are making sure that this technology is not misused or used in a difficult. The same way there was a treatise on hydrogen bomb, on the atomic bomb, we can make those things happening to make sure that AI is not used in a way that will harm us as human beings. So, and that's why it's so important to make sure that all of this technology that we're using and that we can, in a personal, as an organization, as I mentioned, like on my organization, in Corazon Latino, I have encouraged since we discovered, start testing ChatGPT and all all of the derivative technologies to use it to do our work better. If we can free time for us that has to be done in many of the tasks that are time consuming, that we can't, I'd rather have my staff use this technology so they have more time to serve the people that we do. And we do it by planting trees, and we do it by talking to members of Congress. There's still things that AI cannot do, like that, like taking a walk, bringing people out, planting a tree. Technology will get us there, but for the timing we need, and that's where that for me, it's the point that it has this big potential of huge improvement in our lives, but it's also a challenge, and it's also can pose a threat to our existence. But at the same time, we are right now in the moment that we can shape that future. So, and again, I'm going to insist it throughout this. It is a moment where we talk to our elected officials, we talk to the government, that we put those handrails, that establish that direction to allow innovation. Most important, because without innovation, it won't happen. We don't want to hand that, but at the same time, that it's done in a responsible way. We've heard about even using AI in war. That would be catastrophic. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. And I hope that answers a little bit of your question. But for me, that's the way to connect and do to use it ethically, to use it in a way that actually benefits us and makes us do our work best.
Let's get at a few things here. AI is already being used in the fields of war, so let's not be under mistake of that. The generative models that we're using today within public sector are much more advanced in what they're using. Department of Defense, if you will, DARPA, and so many other different platforms here in North America have definitely had their hands in that pie for some time. But the other kickback is, and I hear you mentioning public sector. I'm with that. I think we support the idea of public sector getting involved, but we all know the reality of public sector moves slower than molasses. And the idea that public sector, I saw what happened. I've come through it with what the White House was purported to launch, which just came less than 24 hours ago, if you will, when here in the States. And the reality is it doesn't do enough at all. It doesn't have enough people that are working on the human side of things in the level. What it really goes for, even on the career path, which is abysmal. And we do have people that are here from public sector that are part of the many plus thousand people that are with us today cross-platform. And I say it to you all with no disrespect intended, is that public sector needs to do a better job of what they're doing, but I hold more accountable the responsibility of these platforms that are launching these models in the first place, because they're now worth over trillions of dollars in value. And we need to support these nonprofit organizations that are already geared up with their sleeves rolled up, that are prepared to be able to take on these tasks. We cannot be reliant. I don't think that we could be reliant on government. I have more of a hope and a faith, if you will, in nonprofit organizations that are well funded to be able to take on this challenge and to tackle this monster of a situation at this intersection of AI. And it comes to climate. Katerina, you come to us from Europe. There's a lot of things happening over there. I met with UNESCO in Germany earlier this year. They're trying to wrap their minds around what's happening when it comes to AI and what impact does it have on the ecosystem of technology and the world. What's happening over with Exergy?
So, Christopher, we work with a lot of startups around the world, Europe initially, but then Global South as well. And what I can tell you is that relying on AI for climate solutions specifically, and we just ended our 3 hours work with 4 startups across Africa who are using technology to create their products in mitigate the risk of the climate, climate effects. And so the climate solutions really present several different options. So we can see the advantages, so we can leverage the AI for climate solution mitigation, risk mitigation. We can also see the risk and the biases as well. And so the overall, when I talk to them and find out what's the background that comes off, is we don't want to see an over-reliance on the AI, because there's a risk. If there's a risk on the over-reliance, human judgment and a critical thinking will be sidelined. And then there's an essential thing to view AI as a tool, which is still in development, and we know that, because if we look at the climate change, this is something that is not happening in the last 12 months or 2 years. This is something that we are trying to work on for years. And so it's essential to view AI as a tool to augment human capabilities, much more than to replace the human decision-making entirely. But we have some amazing startups who are using AI to really mitigate the risks and to create some solutions. So as every novelty, there's two separate approaches. One is that we can use AI to the best possible intentions to solve the problems. And then on another side, we can use it really from a negative perspective, where we can see risks and we can see biases as well. And so I think the most important thing is really transparency, security in the privacy of information and AI systems, and also to think about the long-term consequences based on the way how we use the AI algorithms that impact the climate change. And so when you look at Europe, there's a lot of conversation about policy making, the regulation, what is the best way how we actually track and monitor and use and change the algorithms so they can actually be of a better use and we don't lead to that unforeseen consequences. So a lot of discussions are going on still.
Thank you, Katerina. And I go back to Philippe and Sharon. Philippe made a powerful point about task mitigation using these models and being able to spend less time on standard tasks, more time on planting seeds. It seems to me with this notion, this idea of this disruption, when we deal in, and we just had a panel discussion on regenerative processes, if you will, and we talk about regenerative AI and regenerative art. With the consideration audience, for those that are listening, when we talk about anything regenerating, we must have the appreciation that it was pro-generated first, but when there's a regeneration, there's also a degeneration happening. Meaning that, as Sarah Cole Stratton, the great example, when the print press came on the scene, it accelerated the tempo and the cadence of things, but at the same time, there was great dismissal and mass jobs that were lost. But here's my point, and I'm getting back to what Philippe just said about the task mitigating factors, which is very interesting. When universal basic income does arrive, as it should, people will have either be working 10x more using AI, Sharon, Paige, we're coming to you. They'll be working 10x more, or with the consideration that they'll have more time on their hands than they ever had before. How might that time be spent? Should it be in helping better the planet and human betterment? What are we passing on the policies around what it is that we know as technology?
Listen, Christopher, I think before we even get to answering your question, I am using AI to figure out how we survive long enough to become sustainable and to adapt, right? We spend a lot of time, and thank you, Katerina, for all that you do and for mentioning, I think, a couple of things that have to be woven into this conversation. If you're talking about climate action, we're talking about three big buckets. We're talking about adaptation, we're talking about resilience, and we're talking about mitigation, right? But there's been a flip. We should be talking more about resilience, because if you're not resilient, you don't survive long enough to become sustainable. Right? And so this is an emergency that we're talking about. So I hear you, and I'll come back to that. But what I really want to impress upon and throw out there for our panelists to pick up on, and for those of us who are on the various platforms, is that this is first and foremost, and I love what Felipe said, it's a conversation about surviving. How do we survive long enough to become sustainable and to do all the things we need to do to mitigate? Okay, great. I'm using AI to risk engineer and to shift. My goal is to shift $4.2 trillion into resilience investing over the next 10 years. That's what the World Bank, McKinsey, and others estimates needs to be invested in resilience in order for us to even get to what you're talking about. The last thing I will say is that I am less concerned right now about the robot taking my job. I mean, listen, AI has been around since the 30s and the 40s. I mean, we can go back to Tesla and Church. I mean, so what's so different? What's really driving this consideration around AI now? Yeah, some things are happening in computer science. I want to throw back to you, Christopher, the policy considerations around the duality, right? And the rebound effect. So I'm using AI to partner with insurance companies, banks, all those folks who are funding activities, and they need to be shifting that capital into resilience. But at the same time, I'm contributing to climate change because of some of the things that you've talked about. AI requires electricity. And there's such a reliance on fossil fuel that we need to be thinking about the rebound effect. And as AI proliferates, and we're using AI for digital twinning, for weather forecasting, for figuring out how adaptation works, for all these things that Katerina, Felipe, we all care about. But there's another effect, and that is data centers require water. AI, resilience doesn't work without data. AI is causing us to consume more electricity. And so it's a complicated conversation. I agree with you. I don't think the policymakers yet understand enough about what they need to be regulating to even make regulations that make sense.
I agree. And thank you for this expression. As I sit here under the sound of your voice, it reminds me of a thing that I said some years ago, audience and panel. What happens when the technology becomes more advanced than the technologist? That time has now come to pass, Paige. As somebody, and I'll go a little bit off question here with you, Paige, because you're one of the finest world builders that I know in the metaverse. When we think about what we have today in terms of these virtual worlds, you build incredible educational platforms. You build vivid visualizations for many thousands of people to have benefited from being in the ecosystems that you have designed yourself. But as we move forward in this AI-driven world, and we begin to understand the nature between design and thinking about the nature of liberal arts and what that means in relatability to being able to educate the world on climate and to be able to show them things through design and through expression. As we move into a hyper-real phase of XR and spatial computing, what does that marriage pairing look like, Paige, from your lens?
Well, the future, from my lens, looks bright. As long as we use AI and creative technology, public practice, community building, and from the root, diversity and inclusion, to create and use these tools socially in larger contexts to dissolve the isolation and feelings of overwhelming powerlessness that in our future speaker here at the GatherVerse talked about that trauma, that existential angst that's within people. The trauma specialist Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book The Body Holds the Score, The Body Holds the Score, writes about how that trauma is not held within the brain, but within our bodies and our muscles. And by planting seeds, right, in a garden, on a rooftop, in the metaverse, on the moon, when we plant and build together, we're literally pulling out that trauma from within our bodies and becoming that more resilient person that Sharon is speaking about. Well, this is one way, right? When we're creating creative systems that are ultimately rooted in community and dissolving those barriers of trauma within ourselves, not just in a personal, well, we need to start with our personal, but community-wide, and then area-wide and city-wide, right? When we think about edible corridors through our cities as one solution towards food sovereignty and climate and community resilience, often cities are kind of, these ideas are laid out for where the people would go for like the fancy Christmas parade, right? Or like right in the center of town. But we know that community members are, and especially diverse community members, are an often like neglected or second purposed, and often with a water salination or bad air quality because of climate abuses and structural government and social abuses, right? So we know that.
Sorry about that.
Yes. So whether we're in like an urban community lot or we're able to see indicator plants, right, that grow up through the sidewalk cracks, and those plants have value. They're edible and medicinal, and they have agency, and they're survivors, right, in the most challenging situations. Well, a lot of our community members are also survivors and full of possibilities, right? So when we nurture or those planted seeds in different ways, from urban edible food walks with geotagging with that can feed an AI system, or drawing VR models, or using climate data to create like sound art land parties with communities, or drawing VR gardens with thousands of people throughout the world, right? And then that can help, again, give the power to the people, because we cannot rely on government structures. We know this, and we've seen that from, repeated again and again. I think that people, impacted by Katrina are still waiting and dealing with, injustices that we're not right. And so we know that through neighborhood, through the power of our block, right, or our community garden, we're able to transform that into that resilience, that community strength and inner strength that will empower people to work with their neighbors in moments of calamity, whether it's a forest fire, or your town is accepting refugees, or there's like bad air climate and smoke, whatever the calamity and catastrophes that will be among us and already are. We need to be able to work with our neighbors that often some people, some places may view as others. And through community art of creating space and more equitable space in public practice, we're able to rise together.
Beautifully expressed, Paige. Human centricity and culture, cultural integration manifested and expressed through art and creativity. I think this is one of the things that public sector is severely lacking. Arik, as I'm listening to all these expressions by Sharon, Philippe, and Katarina, and just now Paige, I sit here and think about the nature of things. When we become more dependable on technology than we've ever been before, humanity has, and that we now use technology in some ways to understand nature But it seems to me, and I could be wrong on this, that I get the sense that might we be better off understanding nature to better understand technology? Because without nature, you don't have technology. That technology gets its inspiration from nature. And as I've said before, when it comes to art, as Paige just expressed, you can have art without technology, but you cannot have technology without art. Never the other way around. Or when we think about how we're using these platforms, these models, have we become too dependent? And is there a risk in relying on taking the challenge of climate by solely almost getting the majority of our information by way of technology? And are there better ways for us to take advantage of present day technology, being that we're moving as fast as we've ever moved before? Is there a way to be able to take advantage and opportunity to catch up to game speed with the alarming rate of climate destruction?
I mean, we need to put things in perspective. Without technology, we wouldn't have had this conversation at this moment, right? We tend to think in technology in terms of flat screens, smartphones, algorithms, but an axe is a sort of technology, and without the axe, we wouldn't have developed as humans. We wouldn't have reached to the industrial revolutions. We wouldn't have went through the urbanizations, and we wouldn't have been in this crisis that we are today. So it's very much catch-22. There is an old chart that compares the telephone to Angry Birds, and in that sense, instead of Angry Birds, let's look at Chat GPT. And it took the phone 75 years to reach 50 million users, and then it reached OpenAI. It took OpenAI to reach 100 million users. It took them only 4 weeks. That's it. And people are saying, "Wow, look at these things." And in Angry Birds, it took the same amount of users. It took 35 days. And I think the conversation is completely wrong. It's for the telephone to reach this amount of people, you needed manual labor. You needed blood, sweat, and tears. You need people to dig tunnels. You need to lay on cables. You need to go to people's home, explain to them what is the technology that calls a phone. You had 75 years to understand the economic, social, and other impacts of a technology called the telephone. None of us has the tool to understand what is the impact of a technology that is reaching 100 million users in just 4 weeks. I think it's very important to put things in perspective. I mean, every technology and every single technology that ever came, it has like 2 lines. It has the creepy line, and it has the impact, positive line, including nuclear technology that we talked about in the beginning. And yes, it's created awful weapon, but I'm sorry, it's also created one of the biggest positive impact for our survival if we just decide to look at it in this way. In many cases, I mean, Sharon, you said something very interesting. You talked about surviving. I think we are in a surviving mode right now. It's not about surviving, it's about prevailing in this moment. And for me, resilience is much more connected to prevailing more than surviving, because surviving is a process, prevailing is a strategy. And the challenges that we have with technology is that we started to use technological tools, which by nature, they are tactical tools to devise strategies. We are outsourcing much more than simple cognitive functions to technology around us. And that's the biggest challenge and the biggest risk we have around us. We are locked in something that I define as the bling bling reality. And AI, I want it. Why? McKinsey said so. They are using it. I mean, do I need it? Is it going to have an impact? And as such, the bling bling reality is creating this. I mean, we cannot use one algorithm to solve the global climate challenge. There is not going to be one software that is going to solve that. As such, there is not going to be one policy. I just had before our conversation, I looked into what Biden is going to sign with their AI, the US AI policy. I mean, great, but it's not going to impact Europe or Africa or China or Russia. I mean, there is no So you need to have this balance between policy, technology, and society. And what we can do around this table is to do the societal part, because we are not touching the technology, we are not touching the policy. And in that case, we need to stop fixing the world, because the world is up. I mean, there is a great, and I know it's an American-based chat, but pardon my French, there is an old German artist that has a huge poster and says, "Stop fixing the world is fine, it's the people who are fucked." We need to fix the people. We need to stop trying to use technology to impose a global umbrella for one solution fits all. It doesn't work. I mean, AI, the power of AI is to creating a global set of knowledge APIs. Knowledge, not solutions, knowledge, because indigenous community in Africa or indigenous community in the north of Sweden will use that knowledge to have different local solutions, but their implementation should be, filter up to the cloud, so people in food desert neighborhoods across the United States can use it in their own way. But we are not doing that, and that's the line that we need to cross. AI should help us create a global set of knowledge APIs, and we should leave the people to use it as they see fit according to their culture. I mean, electrification in automotive industry didn't come because of policy. Policy comes after. It was one person vision that says, crap, we need to live on Mars. To live on Mars, we need, we don't have any other source of energy. Electrifications. How do I build the story of electrification? I will buy Tesla. That's what started this process of everyone on the planet doing that. We need more of these stories, and then you will see policy moving into place rather than chasing after policies. I mean, it's just, grinding water. So I think perspective is one of the most important things that I miss around the entire AI conversations, because everyone is blinded by this, ChatGPT can do this to me. But we tend to forget that, hey, I'm sorry, it's not even general AI. It's very narrow, based on very narrow set of curated books locked in a library that haven't seen daylight. And we're expecting that solutions. I mean, it's only tactical. Strategy needs to be within us. And that's what I miss right now on the global scale,
I think about the use of the word strategy and tactics. Certainly strategy supersedes tactical and tactical adjustment. When I think of consideration, Katerina, with what ARC is expressing, you mentioned once again the White House, if you will, coming out with these policies that have not been implemented. They have not been voted in yet, and they may not, given the fractionalization of the current government that we have. Here's my point. We tend to not have an appreciation that climate is a global situation here. And climate, in many ways, mitigates and bypasses the geographical lines that mankind has set on this earth. And when I think about the technical poverty that exists, that leads to the imbalance of technology that for some is so readily accessible, but for others, I'm told, for example, in Europe, that 5G is a hard thing to still yet come by. And in some other places around the world, and Katerina, you doing incredible work in the continent of Africa as well, that even broadband, whether here in the United States or severely in Africa and other places, are just not present. Yet here we are talking about the most updated consumed technology that we've seen on the face of our planet. And with the consideration that GPT has only been adopted by perhaps 19 to 20% of the global working world, we haven't seen the true disruption of what's getting ready to happen. What's more adoption comes in. Katerina, I said that to say is that how do we propose taking on this challenge of climate using these emerging technologies? The world hasn't adopted and wrapped their minds around broadband and 5G and common access to the World Wide Web. And what are you doing to address this in working transcontinental?
Christopher, that's a great question. When we think about the policymakers, and we keep talking about this a lot, it is crucial for them to have a feedback from somewhere. And we think that the feedback from the small businesses and entrepreneurial ecosystems, healthy entrepreneurial ecosystems, are crucial for their decision making. We've seen a lot of panels where people are sitting and discussing, and I'm talking about a government policymakers, don't have the basic understanding of what the climate change is based off and what does it mean. And it is different if you look at the different parts of the world. Every continent has a different understanding of climate change because there are different things that are impacting that specific region. And their small businesses are looking at solutions based on the impact that they are experiencing. And so if you look at the AI or any technology, emerging technologies as well, they're using those technologies to mitigate the immediate risks or immediate impact of what they're going through. But these different regions are not communicating. They don't understand. If you look at the North America, there's no understanding of what's happening in Australia or across Africa. When we look at the global south, the communication is missing. So how can we create the policies that are helping if we don't understand what the problems are? I'll give you an example. All of the panelists, really, when you were talking, I was thinking like, yeah, that's right. And so there's so many different things that I would like to comment on. And Eric was the last one who was talking just before me. And we talk about understanding, do we have an understanding of what's happening in regards to climate change? Is it people who brought the earth to this point, or is it the corporations? And so I think there's a lot of we always talk about the demand and the supply. If there's an over demand of a certain things, of course that there's going to be an oversupply. And if there's manipulation of the over demand, this is what's happening. This is the situation that we are at. And, working with a lot of startups, we realize that if we want to use the AI in the best possible way, let's utilize that with the biggest polluters in the globe. So I'll give you one example. If we take, for example, fashion as an overpolluter, which it is, production, supply chain, transportation, etc., and their business model as well. If we use an AI as the best possible way, what I would do is use AI to monitor the production. When we come to the certain point when you say, this is the number that we can't go over, everybody in the industry has to stop the production. Is it going to be mid-year, or is it going to be like the second quarter or the third quarter? A policy making needs to abide everybody in the industry to stop at that point. This is the best experience of how we can utilize AI to impact the climate change. I have a lot of different examples from the startups we work with and how they utilize emerging technologies to impact. But I think it's very difficult to point out in a specific region because this is related to knowledge, experiences, education, understanding, accessibility. Not everybody in the world has access to AI and technologies that can help them mitigate the impact of climate change. So I think this is a great conversation, and we need to talk a lot about this really to clarify what is what in a specific sentence.
I agree. And it seems to me that what's needed now is the human cloud of information, a global consortium, if you will, to be able to help set the standards, Sharon, when it comes to the ethical considerations of AI use in concert with climate alleviation, if you will, and to have a real appreciation, as Paige has expressed, for inclusive culture. Because how is policy able to be set when we have so many different people around the world that are susceptible to this climate impact, and we never even know that it exists for them at their front door because they have no inlet into expressing? This brings to a point. Climate responsibility is not a white situation. I say that with no disrespect intended. It's not a white inherent responsibility. It's not a Black inherent responsibility, Asian or Latin. It is a global responsibility. But we as technologists and creatives, it seems to me that right now the onus of more responsibility is on us than policy, because we are the ones that are innovating and contributing the most to developing these technologies. Sharon, where does the responsibility lay for you? And when it comes to survival, is AI your assistant? Please feel
Yeah.
free to express.
I absolutely rely on AI. I have impacted over 1 million people in the various companies that I've launched. I've created thousands of jobs. And I know that not everything that counts can be measured, but I count what I can because I'm clear about the impact that I'm after. And intention isn't impact. Impact is impact. And so I want to pick up a couple of threads. One, Eric, I want to come back to you and say I agree 100%. Resilience isn't just about surviving. Resilience is about preparing for, adapting to, as well as thriving. Now, engineers may take me on with that, but if I showed you a picture of a dead tree, you wouldn't think that that was very resilient. To Paige's point, we not only are thinking about how do we survive, we're thinking about how we thrive and what essentially is becoming a new normal. I want to come to answer your question, because I know time is always pressing upon us. There's been 3 C's that have resonated with me. This has been a wonderful panel. We've talked about community. We've talked about connectedness. We've talked about communication. One of the things we haven't talked about, which I think is a common thread, is consciousness. So I use AI every day in every way possible. I mean, what is artificial intelligence? It's computer science that mimics how my brain works. And there's all kinds of AI, right? And I can't shift $4.2 trillion into marginalized communities globally without a repository for institutional knowledge, which goes to what Eric is talking about, and Katrina and Paige, and I think to some degree Felipe. Resilience doesn't work without data. And right now, you don't even have to leave the United States. Texas isn't talking to Louisiana. And they're both Gulf states dealing with the same issues in many cases and the same ecosystem. So in order for us to be able to extrapolate learning to say, how are you solving for this? How are you solving for this over here, Felipe, with the communities that, and how can I learn this and take this back to some of the communities in Africa where I'm active? You have to have machine learning, which gets us back to the duality of artificial intelligence. But without consciousness, Christopher, it doesn't work. And can you regulate consciousness? Because if we're talking about ethical considerations in terms of civil rights, right? In terms of how AI is biased because, well, the person who's writing the code is biased. So I'm not beautiful. I can never win a beauty contest because the algorithm isn't trained on my features, right? So how do you begin to regulate consciousness? Last point, you mentioned how we can take nature and infuse it into our conversations about AI and future and sustainability. Well, we're doing that already every day. Look at biomimicry. Look at swarm intelligence. Look at heat mapping. Those are all ways that we are imitating nature. But, you know, if you look at a swarm of birds, they come over here, they find some food, and they say, hey, Christopher, Paige, Arik, Felipe, Katerina, there's food over here. I'm going to eat some food, and then I'm going to get out of the way so you guys can eat some food. That's how swarms of birds behave. But human beings don't do that. I get to the food, and I'm going to say, it's all mine, and you can't have any, right? And so the question is ethics stems from a moral code. And my moral code stems from a consciousness. So I'm loving this discussion, but I think without questions around consciousness, then I think our C's around community, connectedness, communication, and how we come together, it's diminished. So I love it, and I thank you for the GatherVerse because I feel like I found my tribe. And as a technologist, I can raise the issue of consciousness and not be laughed out of the room. So thank you, Christopher.
It's appropriate here to be expressed in your words, as everyone else is here today, and even before this panel, and the ones to come yet today are welcomed here. And at this conclusion that we find ourselves in, the time escapes, doesn't it? It just seems that we only have such a little bit of unforgiving time to be able to share these things. But might I add one more C to your list, Sharon? To me, even with inclusive culture of consciousness, my word for the C will be compassion. That if we have no compassion, then none of this matters for what it is that we're discussing and figuring a way forward. Philippe, hey, Sharon, Paige, Arik, and Katarina, thank you for joining us at this very intimate discussion. Audience, we have a talk coming from Lena coming up, and then we have an incredible and extraordinary roundtable to conclude our time together. We